Aiboan, Vanakkam. I'm Vayoni Dimel. This is Boston Lanka News, bringing you news, views, and entertainment from Boston and USA. Campaign to boycott Sri Lankan products. Demonstrations in Boston. China publishes a report with a title, Human Rights Record of the United States in 2009. International Fashion Show in Boston featuring Sri Lankan fashions and culture. Supporters of Say No to Sri Lanka demonstrated in Boston last week asking the American public to boycott Sri Lankan products. The group charges that Sri Lankan consumer goods and services are funding the camps filled with innocent Tamil civilians in Sri Lanka.
I'm looking for some panties, but I want to make sure that they are not made in Sri Lanka.
Okay, well, some of our stuff is made in Sri Lanka, but we have a lot from Europe.
Okay, well, I'm not buying anything made in Sri Lanka. Innocent women and children, they're living in terrible conditions. People just disappear there every day.
It's made in Sri Lanka.
Mine too.
Send no to Sri Lanka.
Dr. Ellen Shander, the key organizer of the campaign, joins with the Boston Lanka from her home in Connecticut to talk about their campaign. Dr. Shander, what is the impact you would like to see this campaign is making among the American public?
What we're telling people is that if you're going to spend your money, spend it with a conscience and do it in a moral way. The reason why we're doing the boycott in Sri Lanka, as everybody knows, that at the end of the war, there was documentation of horrendous war crimes against the Tamil people. There's been accurate records from the UN representative in Colombo at the time, Gordon Weiss, who documented over 40,000 Tamil civilians being killed towards the end of the war. Then the Tamil civilians were being herded in concentration camps. They were there for 300,000 in the beginning, and now there's 100,000 left. This is a horrendous, brutal military regime. It is punishing and demoralizing an entire Tamil civilian population, and this is not a country to be doing business in.
Are you taking into consideration the impact the innocent people in Sri Lanka who work in factories, both Sinhala and Tamil, might have due to your campaign? They might lose their jobs, and that will bring suffering to their families.
Of course, every human being is important. There's no question about it. But when you look at the geographic distribution of factories in Sri Lanka, they're not in the north and the east, for sure. And although there are some Tamil people that are employed in these factories, it is our position that, yes, it may hurt some people, but on the whole, if you look at our demands for divestment, I think you understand why the overall goal of the boycott campaign makes sense. We would stop the boycott campaign if there was accountability of human rights, demilitarization, a demand for better conditions for Tamil people, to stop the colonization of the North, which is changing the whole geographic and population position up there, but stop the occupation of Tamil lands, and to have free international press. So, yes, I'm sure in the short run there's going to be some hardship if the U.S. and the Europeans divest and pull out of Sri Lanka, but you can't have a government if they don't have money, and you can't have a military if you don't have money. And if the Sri Lankan government apologizes to no one and continues on their path of a brutal military regime, how else can we affect change if we don't do it economically?
Do you really think this accusation about genocide in Sri Lanka against the Tamil people makes sense when large number of Tamil people are living in Colombo, in south and in upcountry areas, along with the Sinhala, Muslim and Burgher communities? And they have their businesses and they've been there for generations.
Genocide is defined as a concerted attempt to destroy the culture, the population, and to marginalize and to destroy a whole community. That's what genocide is, and of course that's ongoing. Are there pockets of places in Sri Lanka where Tamil people make a living and go about their business? Of course there are. I mean, I would assume that there are some places in Colombo and some other areas, but it's not total freedom.
On March 13th, China published a report titled The Human Rights Record of the United States in 2009. This document was clearly intended as a rebuttal to the annual U.S. State Department Country Reports on Human Rights Practices for 2009, released few weeks ago. The Chinese report notes that the U.S. government releases country reports on human rights practices year after year to accuse other countries and takes human rights as a political instrument to interfere in other countries' internal affairs, defame other nations' image, and seek its own strategic interests. Boston Lanka spoke to the Amnesty International spokesperson on Sri Lanka, Jim McDonald, and asked what actions the Amnesty International has taken against so-called human rights violations by the USA.
I would urge those interested in this question to review Amnesty's reports and public statements on the U.S. In particular, we have two current major campaigns going on. The first, Demand Dignity, is focused on economic, social, and cultural rights. An initial focus of that campaign is maternal mortality. It is calling the U.S. government to account for the lack of adequate health care to so many women who are facing the risk of maternal mortality in this country. Another major campaign we have going on is Counter Terror with Justice, in which we are calling for Guantanamo Bay to be closed and for the U.S. to uphold the same human rights standards that it holds other governments to account.
The Northeastern University in Boston had their annual International Fashion Show last week. The show featured models and designs from across the globe, both classic and contemporary fashions that showcased on the runway. Sri Lankan culture and fashion was well represented. Shihara Shafiq designed and coordinated the Sri Lankan fashion segment for the show.
And today we're actually hosting, we're showing actually the fashions from about 16, 17 different nations. And this covers almost every part of the globe. And part of the show is the Sri Lankan section, where we're showing a couple of our costumes as well as our music. And we are having about 10 models show the costumes from our beautiful nation. And the idea of this show is to let American students as well as international students get the full idea about our dresses and our music. So our models are basically going to be international. They're going to be from all over the world, and they're going to get a first-hand experience about dressing in Australia or a sari, and also get an idea about what
That concludes our news edition this week. We meet you next week with another news edition of news, views, and entertainment from Boston and USA. Till then, Goodbye.